order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Steve Brine.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will wish to join me in paying tribute to Warrant Officer Ian Fisher of the 3rd Battalion, the Mercian Regiment, who was killed on operations in Afghanistan on Tuesday, the 5th of November. It is clear from the tributes paid that he was a professional and well-respected soldier who made a huge contribution to the Army over many years on a number of operational tours, and our thoughts and our condolences should be with his family and his friends. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. Steve Brine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure every one of us want to associate themselves with the Prime Minister's tribute. They are a reminder that in this season of remembrance, we will in faith always remember their service to our country. Mr. Speaker, MPs from across the House will have grave concerns about the nightmare unfolding at the Cooperative Bank. Does the Prime Minister share my sense of disbelief that a person such as Reverend Flowers, responsible as he was for such large sums of our constituents' money, was ever appointed to the position of chairman? And what can he now do to find out how on earth that happened?
My honourable friend makes an important point. Constituents across the House will have people who hold co-op bonds who are very worried about what will happen to their investment. But let me be clear, the first priority is to safeguard this bank and to make sure that it's safeguarded without using taxpayers' money. That must be the priority. My right honourable friend the Chancellor will be discussing with the regulators what is the appropriate form of inquiry to get to the bottom of what went wrong here. But there are clearly a lot of questions that have to be answered. Why was Reverend Flowers judged suitable to be chairman of a bank? Why weren't alarm bells rung earlier, particularly by those who knew? And I think it will be important in the coming days that if anyone does have information, they stand up and provide it to the authorities.
Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to Warrant Officer Ian Fisher of 3rd Battalion, the Mercian Regiment. He died serving his country, and all of our thoughts are with his family and friends. Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister tell us how his campaign is going to save the Chipping Norton Children's Centre?
Prime Minister.
I support children's centres across the whole of the country. The fact is, in spite of very difficult decisions that have to be made right across the country, the number of children's centres has reduced by around 1%. And like all members of Parliament, I fight very hard for services in my constituency.
But Mr. Speaker, they are going around saying that children's centres are safe and there is no threat to them. But things are so bad, he's even signed a petition in his own area to save his local children's centre. Now, can he clarify, is the petition addressed to his local Tory council, or is he taking it right to the top?
There are more people using children's centres than ever before in our country. The figures are, because he doesn't want to give the figures, there are 3,000 children's centres, and the point I will make is this. This government can hold its head up high because we're actually increasing the money that is going to local councils for children's centres. That is what's happening under this government.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we all wish him luck in his fight as a local Member of Parliament. Imagine what he could achieve if he were Prime Minister of the country. I think we've established his double standards in Oxfordshire. Let's take another example. In Tory Essex, their proposal, I know they don't care about children's centres, but they should hush down a bit and they can listen. Let's take another example. In Tory Essex, their proposal is to close 11 centres and downgrade 37, with the hours they stay open falling from 50 hours a week to as little as 5. So fewer centres, fewer staff, fewer hours. How is that doing what he promised before the election, which is to protect and improve Sure Start?
Let me tell him what is happening under this government in terms of childcare. For the first time ever, 15 hours childcare for every 3- and 4-year-old in the country. That never happened under Labour. For the first time under this government, free childcare hours for every disadvantaged 2-year-old in the country. That never happened under Labour. And also, to come, tax-free childcare under this government. That never happened under Labour. And we've upgraded the child tax credit by £420 under this government. That is what is happening. But let me be clear. One policy we won't adopt, and that is Labour's policy of funding more hours through their bank levy, and I'll tell you why. They've already spent the bank levy 10 times over. Yes, there it is. The Youth Jobs Guarantee, VAT cuts, more capital spending. Mr. Speaker, this isn't a policy, it's a night out with Reverend Flowers.
Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the people he associates with. He's taken...
Let the House calm down. I'm concerned, as always, about backbenchers, and backbenchers who want to speak should be accommodated. So calm down and let's move on. Ed Miliband.
He obviously wants to talk about who he associates with, Mr. Speaker. He's taken nearly £5 million from Michael Spencer, whose company was found to be rigging LIBOR rates. He's got a party chairman who operated a company under a false name and was investigated for fraud. He's taken millions from tax exiles and tax avoiders. His party has never paid back the money from Azal Nadir. And they're just the people I can talk about in this House, Mr. Speaker. Now, didn't the planning minister have it right yesterday when he said this? The single biggest problem facing the Conservative Party is being seen as the party of the rich.
How extraordinary that on today of all days he wants to talk about the people he associates with and he takes money from. Because what we can now see is that this bank, driven into the wall by this chairman, has been giving soft loans to the Labour Party, facilities to the Labour Party, donations to the Labour Party, trooped in and out of Downing Street under Labour, still advising the leader of the Labour Party, and yet now we know, all along, they knew about his past. Why did they do nothing to bring to the attention of the authorities this man who's broken a bank?
I think we can take it from that answer. I think we can take it from that answer. He doesn't want to talk about his planning minister. Where is the planning minister? Where is he today? Only last January, he was praising him to the rafters, saying he was leading the debate. I think the House should hear more from him. This is what he says about the Tory party, that they stand for people who work for private equity and make a ton of money. He's right, isn't he?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've finally found a public inquiry he doesn't want. He comes to this House and he asks for inquiry after inquiry into the culture and practices of this and that. But when it comes to the Co-op Bank, he's absolutely frightened of it. Now, also, an interesting week to talk about people on the front bench. This week, he has referred to his own Shadow Chancellor as a nightmare. I'm sorry. I hate to say I told you so, but I've been saying this for 3 years. But actually, that's not the most interesting thing in this fascinating exchange of emails. Labour's head of strategy, yes, they do actually have one, Labour's head of strategy replied back to the Shadow Chancellor, when did built to last become part of our thing? I agree, their policies aren't built to last, they're built to self-destruct in about 5 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, what he has shown comprehensively today is he has no answers on the cost of living crisis facing families up and down the country. That is the truth. And his close friend, the planning minister, is right. He said...
Order. The House must calm down. The questions will be heard, however long it takes. It's very simple. Ed Miliband.
And his close friend, the planning minister, is right. He says this. There are many people who don't like the Tory party and don't trust their motives. And he says the Prime Minister is not the man to reach them. What he's really saying is this Prime Minister is a loser.
What we've seen, what this proves, Mr. Speaker, he can't ask about the economy because it's growing. He can't ask about the deficit because it's falling. He can't ask about the number of people in work because it's rising. He can't even ask about banking because he's mired in his own banking scandal. What we've learned, Mr. Speaker, in the last fortnight, he is too...
Answer must and will be heard. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we've learned in the last fortnight, too weak to stand up to his paymasters in the trade unions, too weak to stand up to his bankers, and too weak to stand up to his shadow chancellor. We all know it would be a nightmare, and that's why we're dedicated to making sure the British people don't have to live through it.
The London Gateway port in Thurrock, which is now open for business. But is he as appalled as I am to hear that Unite are picketing the potential clients of that port and encouraging their sister unions to boycott any ship that docks there? Isn't this more evidence that Unite's bully boy tactics cost jobs, not save them?
I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. Visiting the London Gateway port is actually one of the most compelling things I've seen in recent years about Britain's industrial renaissance. It's an extraordinary investment that's going to be of huge benefit, bringing around 12,000 direct and indirect jobs. But she's absolutely right about the dangers of union intimidation and bully boy tactics. That's why it's important we have a review, and frankly it's important that both Unite and the Labour Party take part in that review.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
I'm sure the Prime Minister will agree that the victims of terrorism deserve not just words of sympathy but our full support and help, and must be at the core of any process dealing with the past in Northern Ireland. Given the statement, the very worrying statement by the Attorney-General for Northern Ireland overnight, made on his own account and on his own behalf and without consultation, does he agree that there can be no question of an amnesty for any terrorist atrocities and crimes, and that all victims of terrorism deserve truth and justice?
Well, first of all, let me agree with what the honourable member said, which is the words of the Northern Ireland Attorney-General are very much his own words and not at the behest of anybody else. I can reassure him the government has no plans to legislate for an amnesty for crimes that were committed during the Troubles. Richard Hass, as he knows, is currently consulting with all the Northern Ireland parties on issues from the past as well as parades and flags, and I think that is the right forum in which to discuss these issues.
Sir Tony Baldry.
General Synod is meeting today and hopefully will find a way to enable women as soon as possible to be consecrated as bishops in the Church of England. If this is successful, will my right honourable friend and the government support amendments to the Bishops Act to ensure that women bishops can be admitted to the House of Lords as soon as possible, rather than having to, new women bishops having to queue up behind every existing diocesan bishop before we can see women bishops in Parliament?
Prime Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend follows these matters very closely, and actually the question he asks is an extremely important one. I strongly support women bishops, and I hope the Church of England takes this key step to ensure its place as a modern church in touch with our society. In terms of the problem that he raises, because of course there's a seniority rule for bishops going into the House of Lords, the government is ready to work with the church to see how getting women bishops into the House of Lords can be achieved as soon as possible.
Katie Clark.
Does the Prime Minister believe that the proposal from the Conservative Free Enterprise Group, which is supported by 42 of his own MPs, to put VAT on food and children's clothes shows the true face of the party he leads?
No, I don't support that policy.
Mr. Adrian Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently joined the Plough and Share Credit Union in my constituency, which will help a lot of people will ensure a lot of people will not have to go to payday lenders. What more can the government do to encourage credit unions and to encourage anybody who's got a few pounds to spare to put away, to take the trade away from awful payday lenders?
Prime Minister.
No, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this issue. The government strongly supports credit unions and think they are a very big part of the answer to the problems of payday lending. We've invested £38 million into credit unions. We want to see them expand. We're also regulating properly for the first time payday lending through the new regulator, and we're prepared to look at all the steps that can be taken to sort this problem out.
Alex Cunningham.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Today is Universal Children's Day, and the Prime Minister will be aware that Save the Children has highlighted the importance of early years in children's development. Does the Prime Minister accept that the closure of 3 Sure Start centres a week is undermining the life chances of countless needy children?
I would challenge the honourable member's figures, because the fact is, whereas the pot of money for children's centres was £2.3 billion in 2012-2013, it's going up to £2.5 billion in 2014-15. There are 3,000 children's centres open. As I said, only around 1% have closed, so I think the government has an excellent record on this front.
Mr. David Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now that the changes to Enfield's A&E and maternity services has been given a green light, not by politicians and bureaucrats, as happened under the previous government, but by local GPs. Can the Prime Minister confirm that Enfield is getting increased primary care funding and that Chase Farm Hospital is getting 24/7 access to urgent care?
Well, first of all, let me pay tribute to my honourable friend, who I know has worked very hard on this very difficult issue for his constituents. I understand the Barnet, Enfield and Haringey strategy has been approved, and once implemented, Chase Farm Hospital will provide a service which provides access to GPs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are increases in primary care funding in Enfield, and of course that is part of our plan, not of cutting the NHS, but expanding our NHS.
Mr. Carl Turner.
Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating the good people of Hull on winning the City of Culture 2017?
I'm absolutely delighted to join with the honourable gentleman and everyone in Hull and everyone around the country in celebrating this great award of the City of Culture to Hull. I think it's a very exciting opportunity for Hull. I think it's you'll be able to celebrate the birthplace of Wilberforce, the fact that Andrew Motion lectured in Hull, Philip Larkin was the librarian, slightly more incongruously, Peter Mandelson is the High Sheriff, but every city has its burden to bear. And of course, in terms of popular music, Hull has a fantastic record. I remember some years ago that great House Martins album, which was London 0, Hull 4, because they said they were the 4th best band in Hull. So I'm sure it'll be a huge success for Hull and for Humberside more generally.
Mary MacLeod.
He registered 600 new business startups last year, putting it in the top 10 places in the UK for new business growth. In preparation for Small Business Saturday on the 7th of December, would my right honourable friend meet with me to discuss a review of business rates to encourage future growth, especially in London, where rateable values are very high and therefore rates are excessive?
Well, I'm very happy to discuss this issue with my honourable friend, who always stands up for business and for enterprise. She refers to the number of startups. I think it's a real success story for our country. An extra 400,000 businesses now operating. My honourable friend, the Enterprise Minister, will shortly be telling the House about the 10,000th startup loan, a government scheme that's got off the ground extremely quickly. Of course, there are concerns about business rates. I'm very happy to discuss those with her. But can I take the opportunity of encouraging all colleagues to take part in Small Business Saturday? It's a brilliant initiative that worked very well in the United States, where everyone can demonstrate how much they care about small businesses in our high streets.
Sarah Champion.
Does the Prime Minister agree with his Planning Minister that when modern Britain looks at the Conservative Party, they see an old-fashioned monolith?
Well, I have to say, we've had some interesting interventions from frontbenchers past and present. I hope I can break records by explaining a tweet has just come in from Tony McNulty. We'll remember him, the former Labour Security Minister, saying this: the public are desperate for a PM in waiting who speaks for them, not a leader of the opposition indulging in partisan and Westminster Village knockabout. So, I would stay up with the tweets if you want to get on the right side of this one.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer the House to the Register of Members' Interests as I have recently returned from a delegation to Israel.
I want to hear the words of Dr. Offord, and at the moment I can't hear them. Dr. Matthew Offord.
I will repeat my declaration, Mr. Speaker. I refer the House to the Register of Members' Interests as I have recently returned from a delegation to Israel and the PA with the Conservative Friends of Israel. On both the Israeli streets and in the corridors of power, Iran remains the #1 issue of concern. French President Hollande visited Israel earlier this week to discuss this matter with Israeli counterparts and appears to have clearly understood Israel's legitimate concerns. When will our Prime Minister be visiting Israel, our closest democratic ally in the region, to discuss the Iranian nuclear issue and other regional concerns?
Great. Well, first of all, can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I know there are many people in his constituency who care deeply about this issue and care deeply about the future of Israel. I'll never forget the visit that I made as leader of the opposition, and I look forward to visiting, I hope, next year. I completely understand, and as myself, of course, and when I went to Israel, I also visited not only occupied East Jerusalem, but other places in Palestine as well, as is proper. But I do understand the very real concern that Israelis have about the Iranian potential Iranian nuclear weapon. That is why I spoke to President Rouhani of Iran last night to make clear that we want a good outcome to these talks, but it's got to be an outcome that takes Iran further away from a nuclear weapon rather than one that retains the status quo.
Mr. Peter Hain.
Whilst agreeing with the member for Belfast North that there should be no question of an amnesty, surely there's some merit in the proposal from the Northern Ireland Attorney General that rather than incurring enormous expenditure and effort pursuing crimes committed during the Troubles decades ago, where the evidence is difficult if not impossible to establish, the justified grievances of victims, including widows of police officers and prison officers, should be addressed in other ways so that Northern Ireland can move on from its hideous past.
I have great respect for the right honourable gentleman's views on this issue. He served in Northern Ireland. He knows how important these issues are. I would make 2 points. First of all, I do think it's important to allow Richard Haas to do his work about parades, about flags, and about dealing with the past. Clearly, the dealing with the past part is the most difficult of the three and the most difficult to unlock. The second point I'd make is, look, we are all Democrats who believe in the rule of law, who believe in the independence of the police and prosecuting authorities, and they should, if they're able to, be able to bring cases. And I think it's rather dangerous to think that you can put some sort of block on that. But of course, we're all interested in ways in which people can reconcile and come to terms with the bloody past so that they can build a viable future and a shared future for Northern Ireland.
Mr. David Ruffley.
The people and the businesses of Suffolk are driving economic growth in the east of England, but they are increasingly fearful that the proposed A14 road toll will put Suffolk at a serious competitive disadvantage compared with other counties. Could I ask my right honourable friend if he will seriously reconsider the current road toll proposal?
Well, I will, and I know the Chancellor will, and the Transport Secretary, we will all listen carefully to the representatives made by Suffolk MPs, and I think we've all received representations. I think the important point is we want new roads to be built, and we all know there are shortages in terms of the capital expenditure that we can bring forward. And that's why I think the idea of having tolling for some new roads and new schemes is an idea that's properly worth looking at, but we'll listen carefully to colleagues and people in Suffolk and businesses in Suffolk too.
Mr. Tom Harris.
Parents coming to terms with their loss have no right in this country to paid employment leave, forcing many of them back to work far too soon after the death of a child. Will the Prime Minister commit to amending the Employment Rights Act 1996 to give British parents at last the legal right and time to grieve?
Minister.
I think the honourable gentleman raises a very important issue, and I'm very happy to look at that. Having suffered this experience myself, as a Member of Parliament, actually it is possible to take a little bit of time and stand back and come to terms with what's happened, because colleagues and people that help you are ready to step in and do what they can. So I think he raises a very important point. Let me look at it and get back to him.
Question 10, closed question, Dr. Julian Lewis.
Number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
As I told my honourable friend when he last asked about this issue, if we want a proper functioning deterrent, we need to have the best, and that means a permanent at-sea submarine-based posture, and that is what a Conservative-only government after the next election will deliver.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
May I reassure my right honourable friend that that excellent answer will remain on my website for as long as it takes for the pledge to be fulfilled. I noticed he used the words Conservative only. Will he reassure the House that never again will Liberal Democrats be allowed to obstruct or delay the signing of the main gate contracts? And will he undertake to sign those contracts at the first possible opportunity?
Prime Minister.
Well, what I would say to him, a couple of things. First of all, investment in our nuclear deterrent hasn't ceased. Actually, we're taking all the necessary steps to make that main gate decision possible. Also, we've had the alternative study, which I don't think came up with a convincing answer. But I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I feel that I wouldn't satisfy entirely my honourable friend, even if I gave him a nuclear submarine to park off the coast of his New Forest constituency.
I rather fear that's true. Having known my honourable friend, the honourable gentleman, for 30 years, Mr. Michael Meacher.
Is the Prime Minister aware that, according to The Economist, Britain is now 159th lowest in the world in terms of business investment, just behind Mali, Paraguay and Guatemala? Can he therefore please tell the House when, under his esteemed leadership and that of the Chancellor, Britain can now expect to catch up with Mali?
Well, Prime Minister. I can only conclude that the right honourable gentleman too has been on a night out on the town with Reverend Flowers. And the mind-altering substances have taken effect. The fact is, in the first 6 months of this year, Britain has received more investment than any other country anywhere in the world.
Mr. Stephen O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Had my right honourable friend and the government taken the advice of the party opposite, what would have been the impact on the cost of fuel and the consequences this would have had on families?
Well, my right honourable friend makes an important point. Is that if you look at the cuts and freezes in fuel duty that we've made, fuel duty would be 13 pence a litre higher under Labour's plans than under our plans. It would, to use a simple word, it would be a nightmare.
Mr. Bill Esterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. His own education department says he's closed 578 children's centres. How is this protecting Sure Start?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm afraid I gave him the figures, but he wasn't able to alter his question and think on his feet. The fact is there are 3,000 such centres open and around only 1% have closed.
Mr. Neil Parish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Ashton Manor Brewery in my constituency has invested £10 million in creating lots of jobs in Tiverton. The OECD has upgraded our forecast for Britain while downgrading the global forecast. Is it my honourable friend's view that reducing debt is the way to actually get the economy moving, not actually more debt from the party opposite?
No, well, I'm grateful for my honourable friend and what he says. If you look at the OECD forecast out this week, you've seen a massive increase in the forecast for UK growth over the next couple of years. And of course, the party opposite don't want to talk about the economy because they told us we were going to lose 1 million jobs. We gained 1 million jobs. They told us growth would be choked off. Growth is growing in Britain. That's what's happening. The nightmare of the Shadow Chancellor wants to talk about everything else. And when it comes to debt, let me just remind him of this important point. This is directly relevant to the issue of debt. The Mayor, Ken Livingstone, said this: Gordon Brown was borrowing £20 billion a year at the height of the boom in the first decade of this century in order to avoid having to increase taxes because he wanted to increase public spending. It was an act of cowardice. That is, if you like, the daymare. We're also hearing ranting from the nightmare.
Lisa Pearce.
The housing... Oi.
Order. The Honourable Lady has a right to put her question and to be heard when she does so. And that's what's going to happen. Theresa Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Housing Association, that is landlord to some of the poorest people in my constituency, recently voted its chief executive a non-contractual redundancy payoff of £397,000. Will the Prime Minister join me in condemning the board's action and asking for it to be repaid and invested in much-needed tenant services?
Well, I'm very happy to look at the case the Honourable Lady mentions, because some of these payoffs really are completely unacceptable, and we need to make sure that local authorities properly take responsibility for stopping such high payoffs. In terms of other parts of the economy, we're actually making sure that if people are re-employed having taken these payoffs, then they have to pay back the money, and I think that's vitally important, and perhaps it might apply in this case too.
Mr. James Arbuthnot.
Does my right honourable friend agree that a key element of the success of the plan for the reserves would be if my right honourable friend could join together with the Leader of the Opposition and inspire employers that the success of this plan, because there is no plan B, is in the national interest?
Yes. I completely agree with my right honourable friend. I think this is an important programme for the future of the country. Of course I understand honourable members and right honourable members' concerns about this, but if we pass the amendment in the name of the honourable member for Billericay, that would simply stop us investing in our reserves and improving our reserves rather than changing the overall stance. I have noticed that Labour are saying, they put out a statement today saying we're not calling for the reforms to be reversed, we're not saying the reforms should be shelved. In that case, if they vote against the government, one can only assume it's naked opportunism.
Mary Glindon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister explain to this House why he wanted to delete his pledge of no cuts to public services from the Conservative Party website?
Prime Minister.
Well, what we promised is that we wouldn't cut the NHS, and we haven't cut the NHS. We made absolutely clear before the last election we would have to take difficult decisions, but it's because of those difficult decisions the deficit is coming down, employment is growing, there are 1 million more people in work, our economy is doing better, and if we followed the advice of the party opposite, we'd have more spending, more borrowing, more debt. All of the things that got this country into the mess in the first place.
Order.